Hey guys, my name is Chris Lawyer from Naschkatze Audio, and in today's video we are going to talk about house music history. Now, when I created this channel and I made the welcome to the channel video, I told you I will speak about house music history, and now the time has came. I think it's an exciting topic, and as a DJ or producer you really have to know something about this era, but otherwise you just have to know about it. So house music is built on the 4/4 pattern, but who came up with that? Actually, this was a guy called Young. He invented this 4/4 pattern, and this really shaped the disco music. Oh shit! What it is? Now, before we are talking about Chicago house, we have to go back to New York for a little bit. There was this club called The Loft. It was 100 people big and dance music was played there, and Frankie Knuckles played in the club. It was a small club, like 100 people big, and it was owned by Nicky Siano. Not so much later, Nicky Siano opened his new club called The Gallery. It was a lot bigger, 500-600 people big, and it gave an energy to the New York gay scene. And Frankie Knuckles also invited Larry Levan there, and they both played in the club. In 1977, Robert Williams, club promoter of Warehouse, opens his new club on 206 Jefferson Street. And in 1981, he brings Frankie Knuckles to the club as a resident DJ. And that changed everything. Frankie transported the energy of New York gay scene into Chicago, but straight people were starting to go there too. He was playing music with more heavier bass, soulful, uplifting vocals, and it was more classy. And he also played the tracks 2-3 months before the release. Warehouse had a great impact on the dance scene. Not soon after, people started to look for releases that were played in the Warehouse. So the shop, Imports, started to label their vinyls as played in the Warehouse, and those records sold really well. But also in this time, the basic foundation of Chicago house style DJing were laid down. It was like, it had to be really even and smooth and have a tight blend between the tracks. But also things like no vocals in the vocals. In this time, house was really underground and you had to go to the club to hear it. But Frankie Knuckles realized that people want to listen it. He recorded his DJ set on cassettes and he shared it with people, and people started to share it rapidly, copied that a lot of times. So it spread it. Also, Chicago house DJs had to be really creative with the tracks. There were not much tunes, so they were like teasing with certain parts of the track and check the crowd if they liked one part and repeated that. A lot of times they had 2 records, so they can manipulate the track. It was an exciting era. The house music started to grow in Chicago and is the biggest phenomena since rock and roll. Just after its appearance, in 50 years, it took over the whole dance scene. I'm going to tell you how. In the beginning, house music producers didn't really have their own sound. So it was starting from stalling disco grooves and using gospel acapellas or soul acapellas, parts of different music, and they put them together to create something new. So one of the most important tracks in the house music is Loletta Holloway's Love Sensation, especially the acapella. Chicago house DJs sampled it over and over 300 times. And from a gospel singer, this transferred Loletta into a house diva. Now 2 important names, Maya Sharon from Western Records and Michael Brody, his partner. In 1978, January, Michael Brody, financially backed up by Maya Sharon, opened his new club, Paradise Garage, on 84th King Street in Chicago. And the whole idea behind it was if people can dance together, they can live together. And he invited Larry Levan to be the DJ of the club. And as Maya Sharon referred to it, it was the ultimate expression of the whole fabric of gay nightlife. And Larry Levan not just played one style, he played many styles of music. And he really know how to control the crowd. He was saying like, watch this, watch if I put this track on, what will happen. He was not the best in mixing, but he really know how to put up a record. He could mix if he wants, but he was better in know which track goes well after what track. Because of this, he could create a house party feeling with 2,000 people. 12th of July in 1979, there was this game between Chicago Sox and Detroit Tigers. And this game is not remembered because of what happened on the game, because actually the game never happened. It's remembered because something called the Disco Devolution ran by DJ Steve Dahl. He was a radio DJ. Disco records started to take their place in the radios, and DJ Steve Dahl was not really happy about it. So this fucker, Steve Dahl, decided it would be funny to burn up hundreds or thousands of disco records. People started to bring those records, and some of them were disco records, but there were a lot of R&B records and, you know, just generally black records. And it was more against the black community than just the disco lovers. After this happened, dance labels closed, radio switched back to rock and pop. Generally, the disco died, but later something new appeared. house music born from the ashes of the disco. And as Frankie Knuckles said, this was the revenge of disco. And techno was a bit different. It brings intellectual to dance music. And a really good example on that is Rhythm of Rhythm, String of Life. It happened as Derek May moving forward with the piano ballad of Michael James. Black people in Detroit were transferred out to the suburbs. This was a matter of the current situation. Detroit was really not going well, and these guys were escaping to the music. There was a book, Alvin Toffler, The Third Wave, which is like the holy bible of techno. Inspired by that, techno became a utopistic, futuristic vision, but in sounds. Driven by this way of thinking, tracks like Alice of Your Mind happened, which is still a Detroit classic this year. And in the techno scene, names like Mojo or Kraftwerk or Daft Punk, they are really important. In 1982, Robert Williams opened a new club. It was the Music Box, and Ron Hardy was the resident DJ there. And this was a whole new dimension to the scene. The loudest music was played in the Music Box. And as Derek May said, what Ron Hardy did on the dance floor, it was like voodoo with dance music. And also, it just made everything else shit. And Ron Hardy always opened with the track Welcome to the Pleasure Drum. He was playing really fast because he was always on heroin and everything sounded slow to him. Hot Mix 5 was really important in the spread of house music. These guys played differently than Chicago house DJs who played the track for 6-7 minutes. The Hot Mix 5 created really short mixes. They played the track like 1.5 to 2 minutes. Because of that, it was more intense. The Hot Mix 5 was going to be Hot Mix 6, but one of the DJs didn't appear on the opening. Kenny Jammin' Jason, Ralph Rockin' Rollin' Rosario, Mickey Mixin' Oliver, Pally Funkin' Keith, and Scott Smokin' Sills created the Hot Mix 5. In 1984, Frankie Knuckles and Jamie Principles released their track Your Love, first heard in 1983. Jamie listened to classical music, pop, also gospel, and he had a musical background. But the labels turned the label down. They said it's not something they were looking for. And from this point, house music was not recycled disco, it was something new, something fresh. And many people refer to this track as the year zero of house music. But there's also another track, Jesse Saunders' On and On. This track gave Chicago house music a boom because it let the non-musician know that they can create tracks as well. And this track was sampled from Funky Town and Mac On and On. And it was co-produced with Vincent Lawrence. And just in Chicago it sold 20,000 to 30,000 records. And around this time jacking started to happen, which was a new form of dance. It was more sexual oriented itself. So dance moves were inspired by sex. And what was jacking about? It was like there's a girl in the middle and people started to jack her. Sometimes 3, 4, 5 guys jack the woman. But if you were not lucky to have a girl, you could jack with a wall, jack with a mirror, or jack with anything. So it was just something crazy. And there was this track, Cheap E, Time to Jack, which was the first track that sampled the word jack. People loved it. People went crazy on this record. And by this time, the drum machine started to appear in the house music, and everyone who had a drum machine in Chicago started to produce house. Casio drum machine was really popular, or Dr. Rhythm in the beginning, and not so much later, the 909, the 808, or the 303, or the 707 appeared, and the house music DJ started to use that. A really important instrument of house music is TR-909. By Roland Corporation by Hikaru Kakahashi. In the beginning it didn't sell well because it was created for a whole different audience, but as musicians didn't like the artificial sound of the TR-909. The house music guys, they loved it. And still at this point, the TR-909 hi-hat is really important in the productions. You can find it in many tracks. You can hear it in tracks like Larry Heard, Can You Feel It, Derek May, Strings of Life, Thirstic Holly, Jack Your Body, future acid tracks. So as I mentioned in the beginning, house music is coming from low, from the urbans, from the suburbs, and people didn't have a lot of money. So a lot of times they bought these drum machines from second-hand stores, and in the beginning they were only available to create a 4 or 8 bar loop and repeat it over and over.
Time to jack, time to jack. Down to jack, down to jack, down to... Okay.
You cannot go further without mentioning the Drex Records, which is owned by Larry Sherman, who was a really good businessman, and he found a way how to make cheap vinyls. But because the printing of the vinyls was cheap, it was a good way to get large quantities out quick. And in the early stages, Larry Sherman paid a good amount of money for the producers, but he also bought the rights. But this means that the guys sold their track and they got their money from it. But of course, Drex Records made a lot of money after that. But this was a good deal for the producers because they could get their tracks out and Track Records was the only one who printed vinyls in Chicago at the time. In 1986, the track has been released by Fairly Jackmaster Funk and Dario Ponda, and this was Love Can Turn Around. And after the radio started to play it, the track really blew up, and in 1986 August it went into top 10. Also in 1986, Larry Heard, who you may remember as Mr. Fingers, put out his record Can You Feel It, which brought jazz sophistication to the raw house beat. Also in this year, Marshall Jefferson released his track Move Your Body, which was a bit more musical, and by the way, this track used 707 samples. It's a really important track because it showed the house producers how to use piano riffs as a strong rhythmical instrument like guitar. In the same year, Still Sick Hurley created his track Check Your Body, which was the first track to hit #1 on the dance chart. DJs like Frankie Knuckles, Marshall Jefferson and Joe Smooth went on tour in the UK, and people loved them, and they were treated like superstars. From the experiences of the UK tour, Joe Smooth was really inspired, and when he went back to the USA from these experiences, he created his track The Promised Land, which was inspired by Martin Luther King's speech. In 1989, Inner City Big Fun released, and this is a track what referred as a soundtrack of what we call the Summer of Love. In 1989, a group called Ten City created their track That's the Way Love Is, and this track transferred house music from raw loops into real music. In 1987, a couple of guys from London went to vacation to Ibiza: Paul Oakenfold, Danny Rampling and Holloway. They experienced a whole new scene there. There was this guy called DJ Alfredo who played there, and he played a mixture of music like pop music and dance music, and also played some of the tracks he was into, which were Chicago house. And the guys really loved how DJ Alfredo mixed up the styles, and he had to because in Ibiza the crowd was a mixture of different people. Based on this experience, when they got back to Britain, Darren Rampling opened a club called Shum, which was a club with really low ceiling and basically not a good ventilation, so it was a sweatbox. In Shum, the people used a lot of ecstasy, but Chicago house music started to arrive in Britain. It was still dominated from the USA, but the rave culture started to begin. And just in 3 years, house music took over the scene in Manchester to London to Ibiza. By the year 1990, it also appeared in Australia. In this same year, 1899, tracks came out like a guy called Gerald Voodoo Ray, which inspired a new night in Hacienda. So they opened on Wednesdays, and these parties were really successful. In Voodoo Ray, it was more a groove, but people really felt it. And the other track, Royal House, Can You Party? As people referred to it, it was like a train hitting the hacienda. In Britain, the culture of house music, the musical revolution, the rave scene was driven by drug taken. If we speak about the Britain scene, there's someone we cannot go over. His name is Pete Tong. Pete Tong's job was to gather the best tracks and put them out. He went to vinyl shops like City Sounds or Groove Records. He started to hear these new kind of music, collected them and put it out in a compilation. This was called The House Sound of Chicago, and this compilation really triggered the scene of Britain. In 1987, DJ Pierre, Herb Jackson, and Earl Spanky Smith Jr. went to Marshall Jefferson, and they basically asked if they can use their instruments, like the drum machines, like the keyboards, and they started to create music together. They created something totally new by an accident with the 303, a machine which was designed for karaoke. This was how acid house music was born. The really important track in the acid house is Future Acid Tracks. And from this point, DJ Pierre is referred to the godfather of acid house. Alright, so why the acid house is important? On the Summer of Love, acid house parties started to happen in the UK. And as the party was shut down, there was no really place for the people to go for an after party. So they started to organize these illegal events next to the route M25. So it was like people go to a telephone booth and called someone, and he told them, go to this point and from there call me again, and they just give the location to the people. Not so much time spent before these parties blew up. There were situations like next to 1,000 people living village, 2,000 party faces appeared, and the moral panic just started to begin. And if you were there as a DJ, you could really experience why it's different. There were bags of money and shotguns on the places, and the music was really loud. It could be heard 4 miles away. I'm using miles this time against kilometers. Get on with it. So these parties were inspired by the Detroit techno and Chicago house. In 1989, the second Summer of Love, the police stepped in, but this triggered something unexpected. More criminals arrived, and the organizer of the parties were kidnapped a couple of times. From this time, an important record, Orbital Chimes, which created a whole new unique sound. And from this time, we really have to talk about innovators like Todd Terry, who brings hard-hitting hip-hop sensibility to the house beat, using quick samples and rugged bass lines. That just started to shape house music. The British scene started to make house music their own, and they have to give a new genre for the kind of music. And with tracks like Orb, Little Fluffy Clouds, Ambient House introduced chilling out to the rave generation. And there was this group, Happy Mondays, who really liked house music, and they mixed up the indie music with house music, and their track VFL was a big success, and this introduced house music to a new audience. Just like in Chicago, house music had an effect on the British culture. Before that, black and white people were living parallel next to each other, but they were not going to the same places, they were not partying at the same places, but the rave culture shaped that. This team called Shut Up and Dance moved Britain music one step further from Chicago and New York beat. These guys took breakbeat hip-hop samples and sped it up to a house music tempo, and this also laid down the foundation of jungle and UK garage. Shut Up and Dance created their hit single 20 Pounds to Get In. And in London, the music was driven by drug taken, so that's the reason why the tempo sped up. This time in the USA, Johnny Badram created the track Energy Flash, and this track was more like a dark house or techno track, which was too much for the scene over there, but it was perfect for the London scene. And with this one, the rage culture started to begin in the UK. Hardcore just became more than sound taste. It was an attitude. Very soon a whole new sound appeared called drum and bass. Goldie sampled breakbeats and sped them up even more. This was something more dark, more heavy. Really fast, of course, but it was sampled a lot and it went viral. The crowd loved it. His album Timeless catapulted drum and bass into the charts and into the clubs. At this time in the USA, guys like Masters at Work or Armand Van Helden started to remix pop tracks, and these tracks quickly became club floor fillers. Not so long after, official labels started to request DJs to put club beat on their pop tracks. In 2001, the UK garage started to take its shape. It was built on American house music 4/4 beats, but it was more raw. It was on a tempo like 1:28 to 1:30. They used jungle bassline and twisted rugged samples from the drum and bass. It was an interesting fusion of American house beat, breakbeat, jungle bassline and reggae style vocals, and the crowd loved it. From this point, these illegal parties started to be big licensed events. Okay guys, so this episode was about house music history. I hope you could follow along, and I hope you find these informations as exciting as I do. Of course, there may be some things I completely missed out, but if you want to know more about house music history, go and check the links in the description. I collected some documentaries for you. Yeah, I'm that good. Also, you will find the link to a house music playlist on Spotify, which I created from some of my favorite tunes from this era. Alright guys, I was Chris Lair from Naschkatze Audio, and this video was sponsored by Naschkatze Underground. I see you in the next one. Peace.
Who's doing what?